This chapter is a very good chapter on getting a handle on the differences between translations in English. So look at this for, first of all, for a critical eye for doing the type of exegesis we're going to do for the class. And secondly, to get a handle on the difference between translations so you can answer folks in your ministry when they ask you which translation should I use. So I think you'll find this chapter very enlightening. The Bible was originally written in 3 different languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Aramaic was used in the book of Daniel, parts of it, and it's very similar to Hebrew, but it is somewhat different. Reading translation is not a bad thing. If you are able to work with the languages, you are able to read the original. We realize that taking this course, many of you will not be taking Greek and Hebrew, and that's not a problem. You will use translations throughout your ministry. So let's look at some of them. Your basic tool is going to be your translation. One good translation should be used for consistency and memorization. For study, it is a good habit to use multiple good translations which will differ from one another. Now, translators are forced to make 2 kinds of choices. The first is textual, that is the actual wording of the original text. Now, this is called textual criticism, and when one is working with the manuscripts we have available, sometimes the wording is different. So the art and the science of textual criticism is determining which wording, which variant reading in the manuscripts should be used to construct the original text. Now at NOBTS, Dr. Bill Warren is the director of our Textual Center. We have one of the largest textual centers in the world right here on our campus, and we would encourage you to take the tour through his museum and to learn about what they do and the students who are working in textual criticism in that department. The second choice that the translator must make is the application of translation theory when he or she is rendering the text into English. So let's see what that means. First of all, understand that no original copy of any book of the Bible is in existence today. What we have are thousands of hand-copied manuscripts that do exist. The later manuscripts often significantly differ from the early ones. Now, this is very important when we get over to explaining translation theory. Textual criticism is reconstruction of the original text. Because we don't have the original, we have to decide as we look at different manuscripts which reading we think is closer to the original. It's a science that uses careful controls. It weighs external evidence, which is the physical manuscript itself, the quality of it, how well has it been preserved, how old is it, and so forth. Internal evidence are the tendencies that different scribes and authors would evidence. The best external and internal evidence yields a high degree of certainty about the original text. Although it is a science, TC is not an exact science. There are situations where the evidence is not clear one way or another. In these cases, the point of the text most often does not depend on a text critical decision. Now, Gordon Fee and Doug Stewart have a statement here. Let's consider the King James Version and the New King James. When it was translated, the King James Greek text, they used the best text they had at the time. The texts that they used were late manuscripts, meaning the time distance was further from the original, and there were thousands of copyist mistakes and alterations. Sometimes scribes would copy things and they weren't professional scribes, and they often entered mistakes into the manuscripts, which, as we discovered older manuscripts after the King James had been translated, we were able to correct a number of these. While few of these mistakes really affect doctrine at all, they can make a difference in how we interpret specific texts. So, Fee and Stewart are very adamant that as you are using a study Bible to do your exegesis and your sermons and Bible studies, they suggest not using King James or the New King James. Now, if you look on page 43 in the 4th edition of Fee and Stewart, there's a really good paragraph, and it's not that they are anti-King James for any emotional reason. They're just saying the better manuscripts are reflected in the newer discovered manuscripts, so they would recommend using something like the New RSV, the RSV, the ESV, the Holman Christian Standard Bible, NIV, and so forth, because a lot of these older variant readings have been corrected by using the older manuscripts. So, for exegesis purposes, they recommend you don't use King James Version. Now, King James is beautiful. New King James corrected a lot of that archaic language, but it's still based upon the Byzantine text types. So we're not as adamant in our course. If you want to use your King James or your New King James, that's up to you. But certainly do compare the translation of your King James to other translations like New American Standard, ESV, Holman Christian, the NIV, and so forth. So that would be our caution at this point. So there are some technical terms we need to get under our belts in order to understand Fee and Stewart's discussion. First is original language. That term means the language in which the text was originally written. The receptor language is the language into which one is translating. The Greek or the Hebrew, in our case, would be English. The historical difference are the differences between languages in time, culture, and history. Now, this slide gives a couple of definitions that are really, you need to get nailed down. Formal equivalence means that the translators, in their attempt to bring the original language into the receptor language of English, have done so, and they have stayed very close to the form of the Greek and the Hebrew. This tends to give you a more wooden type translation, but the attempt is to retain the historical distance. Functional equivalence attempts to keep the meaning of the original, but while also rendering it into normal English idioms. So it's not quite as stilted, not quite as wooden. It's more functional than it is form related. And then a free translation would be translating ideas into the receptor language. A free translation would be something like The Message or a paraphrase like the Living Bible or the New Living Bible. Formal equivalence would probably be more like an example of the New American Standard. Some would put the ESV as a formal equivalence, where more functional equivalence would be something like your NIV would lean toward this, and so forth. So there's a scale, there's a continuum, and a committee has to decide: are we going to stick closer to the form and make a more wooden, stilted translation, or are we going to go more toward function and make it a little easier to read, like today's English version, written on, I believe, a 6th or an 8th grade reading level, and they make it more smooth, but they're retaining the meaning of the original. Theory of translation means the degree to which one puts primary emphasis either on form or function, formal equivalence or functional equivalence. We see that there are problems with either of these. Formal equivalence tends to keep the historical distance in language and grammar, but it often makes English ambiguous where the original was very clear. Free translations eliminate so much of the original, they're more like commentaries than they are for getting close to the original language. Now, does that mean that one is bad and one is good? Absolutely not. It just means you use different translations for different purposes. So, if you are wanting to read in a leisurely devotional fashion, you might want to read a more free translation. But if you're doing word studies for a sermon or for a Bible study, I would recommend you use more of a formal equivalent translation like the New American or the ESV. That's going to help you for that purpose. You see the difference? And if you just love your King James because you like how it reads, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I have to just say that for memorizing Scripture, King James Version, boy, it's so different. For me, it's easier to memorize. And so you can see, for choosing a translation, a good functional equivalent are going to be the NIV 2011, the HCSB, Holman Christian Standard Bible, the New American Bible, and the New American Standard. If you want to use the other translations, another formal equivalent would be NRSV, NASB, or the free translations, REB and New Jerusalem Bible.